Hi everyone and welcome back to Splash Page. I'm Sean and as always I'm joined by Andrew, and today we're going to discuss a topic that I think shocked a lot of first-time Invincible watchers, people that didn't read the comics, and that is how truly violent and gory this story really is.
Yeah, it got pretty gory pretty quickly towards the end of that first episode when a lot of people realized where this show was going.
So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a little countdown, the top 10 most brutal deaths. I do want to caveat that this list is only people who died. Otherwise, this would just be a list of Mark getting his ass kicked, and which we would just title the video Season 1 of Invincible. So, so without any other lead in, let's jump right in. Andrew, do you want to start with an honorable mention?
Yeah, let's do it. So our honorable mentions are all the groups of people that died en masse that we kind of didn't get to see any individual deaths. There were all the people of Chicago when Omni-man smashed Mark through the ground and into the subways. There were all the people in that small town by the avalanche. There were all the millions and millions of Flaxons that were murdered by Omni-man. Basically, whenever Omni-man just went Full Metal Jacket, just killing everyone.
Right,
All of
yeah.
those deaths.
In episode 2, there's also all the humans that died from the Flaxen invasion. There must have been a ton of brutal deaths that obviously we didn't see too closely. And just assuming that, those are all honorable mentions, because if we went through and took the time to find individuals that were killed in those situations, this video would be very long and kind of boring.
This would be a top 10,000 list.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't we do this? Why don't we start now with that honorable mention out of the way at number 10? Yes. And to me, the 10th most gruesome death is when Titan takes down the gang members. This is at the beginning of episode 5. Titan storms into the room and murders everybody in that room. The deaths aren't overly gruesome or overly gory, but there are two specific ones I want to call out. The first one, Titan throws a gun at a guy and basically takes off the front of his face, including his skull. It's just so incredibly violent. Even though that guy probably didn't feel much pain because it had to be an instant death, that one was brutal. And then another guy turns the corner only to be face to face with Titan, pulls the trigger point blank for the bullet to bounce off of Titan and then go through his own head. Again, kind of an instant death, but geez, do they linger on what it looks like to be shot in the head.
All right, number 9 on the list is that scene when Omni-man brutally murders those 5 invisible soldiers that Cecil sent into his house. He sees them and kind of does some Matrix moves, smashing one of them in the face with his own gun. And all 5 of those were pretty intense.
Yeah, I particularly feel bad for the last soldier, the woman that gets blown out of the door and lands in the street, where she's obviously paralyzed before he kind of quickly ends her as well. And they were just kind of doing what they were told to do. They knew they were absolutely screwed the second that Omni-man realized they were there, because bullets weren't going to stop him.
Yeah.
Coming in at number 8, it's the pilot that Omni-man kills when the 2 fighter jets attack him as Mark and Nolan fight. The reason why I think this one is so brutal is because you have to imagine what's going through this poor pilot's head as he's sent on a mission that will obviously do nothing besides potentially delay Mark and Nolan from fighting further or closer to another city. It starts with Omni-man flying directly through the fighter jet's plane, blowing it up, and he's falling out of the sky, still attached to the ejection seat, but unable to have the parachute deploy. He's falling toward the earth in what has to be his last moments of life. Mark comes out of nowhere and grabs the seat, slowing him down before, of course, the parachute does deploy, pushing Mark off of the chair, then continuing his tumble down to earth. Right before Mark gets there, saves him from falling into the ground, he stands up and says, "Wow, man, am I lucky to be alive. Thank you so much, Mark." And guess what happens next? He gets his head popped by Omni-man. It's a brutal scene.
Number 7, one of the Mauler twins. Who knows which one, the original or the clone, or who knows if any of them are even the originals anymore. They might both be the clones. But this is that moment when they first escape from jail. They're on a rush. They're about to be free. They've got a secret benefactor. They're about to go off to continue doing whatever it is they were going to do next. And suddenly a laser pops up in front of them. And these guys pride themselves on being geniuses. And the one that ends up dying doesn't know how to get out of this. His brother does. Or his clone, I guess you would call it. And that's got to be frustrating to begin with, that he's got an idea and you don't have one. But then the fact that his idea is to use you as a human shield, just the fear and the betrayal and the pain as the laser cuts through your limbs and blood goes flying everywhere.
Number 6 is the unnamed villain that was fighting the Immortal in the first episode before he gets called to headquarters and then killed by Omni-man. In this, he's grabbed by the Immortal and thrown into space, and the Immortal actually says something along the lines of, when in doubt, throw them into space. To be fair, he was threatening to blow up Denver, but what ends up happening to him is one of two things. The first, if you were to go through the atmosphere at the speed that the Immortal would need to throw him to get him into space, his body, considering it was just out in the open, not wearing a helmet, would burn up in that atmosphere due to two things: friction first, and the second is actually the compression of air in front of him that would compress as he's going through, because it wouldn't have enough time to get out of the way, causing extremely high pressures. The second, and what I think actually happens in the show, because we do see a clip of him in episode 4 floating by in space frozen, is if he somehow got through the atmosphere, not burnt to a crisp, once he got into space, there is just a vacuum out there and it's absolutely freezing. So he would have either frozen to death or suffocated within about 10 to 15 seconds.
Number 5, Duplikate. Okay, yeah, she's technically still alive, but she was killed a number of times. 14 to be exact, on screen at least. 11 during the many Flaxen battles, and then another 3 during the Machine Head fight. She's been shot to death and torn apart and smashed into a wall, barely escaping with her life. And I think that's the one that is the worst. When she's smashed into a wall and escapes within an inch of her life and then collapses. I'm sure getting shot to death is also pretty terrible, but I think that time that she gets smashed into a wall is the worst of her deaths. And that's our number 5 most gruesome death.
Number 4, and I think this one might surprise some people. It's the 2 henchmen that are on the roof of a building in Midnight City when Darkwing shows up and stops them from breaking into the building. The reason I say that this might surprise some people is the last time we see these guys, they're magnetized to a water tower, hands above their head, and look to be in a pretty safe and comfortable position. 2 things happen. The first, Darkwing gets called to the headquarters and then is killed by Omni-man, so no one knows these guys are up, stuck to this water tower. But second, this is actually an old form of torture, which many of us are familiar with, crucifixion. In this case, they are hung by their wrists, which is actually one of the most brutal ways to go. What would end up happening is first their shoulders and wrists would dislocate, the blood would drain out of it. Once all the strength in their arms is gone, which can take as little as 10 minutes, their chest would then take all of the pressure, causing them to not be able to breathe. And based on some research I did online, it looks like they could be dead within the hour. So these 2 guys have a very, very, very slight chance of surviving this if someone happened to see that they were up there and went up there within 30 minutes to an hour. Otherwise, these guys are dead, and it is in an absolutely brutal way.
Number 3, the Immortal, the second time Omni-man kills him. Now, this is why this is in our top 3, even though the Immortal can never really die. It's because it's the second time that Omni-man killed him. The first time, he didn't know what was happening, and he gets taken out pretty easily. But then he wakes up. He realizes what happens, that one of the people he trusted most in the world turned on him and his friends and murdered them all. And he has this chance to exact his revenge. He knows what he's getting into this time. And in rage and anger, he flies off after him to take him on and finally take him down. And after a pretty badass battle, Omni-Man once again puts his fist right through his torso and ends up slicing him in half. The pain must have been terrible, but the agony of knowing that you couldn't stop him twice has to be just terrible.
Number 2, Doug Cheston. Sure, he isn't a hero. He's not even a good guy. He uses his parents' money to feign importance and says a lot of vile things to women. But this is, I think we can all agree, a brutal way to die. He is captured or kidnapped in the school quad, wakes up chained to a laboratory table where he puts on a strong face at first, but then when he sees all of the other experimentation by D.A. Sinclair on other students, freaks out, and rightfully so. It isn't until he looks down and sees that his arm has been removed from the elbow down and replaced with mechanics that the screaming starts. I can see this being like one of those situations where you cut yourself and it feels wrong, but it doesn't really hurt until you look down and see it, and then you're like, oh my god, this kills. The other thing is, once he starts screaming because of the pain or because of how afraid he is, D.A. Sinclair cuts out his voice box. So now he no longer has a voice box. As if that couldn't be bad enough, he is then sent to fight Invincible, getting absolutely whooped in the process before looking down into the fountain and seeing that he has become a monster. So he jumps, lands on a sculpture that is the shape of a sundial, killing himself. Absolutely brutal in so many ways that even if you hated this character, which I think most of us probably did, he didn't deserve that. Or maybe he did. Who knows?
And the number 1 most gruesome death in the season 1 of Invincible. Yep, that's right. Red Rush. Okay, so technically we put the pilot who got his head popped down at number 8, and Red Rush technically also got his head popped. But Red Rush is no ordinary human being. Besides his super speed, he perceives things so very differently from the rest of us. And what in reality only took a fraction of a second it must have felt like minutes, hours, days to him as he was flailing helplessly, breaking his wrists on the guy's chest as his eye slowly pops out of his head, and probably out of the corner of his eye he could see his friends running towards him, knowing they're not going to get there in time, as his skull just explodes. And since this was really the first really gruesome death we saw in Invincible, and was really the oh shit moment for a lot of people who hadn't read the comics, and even for those of us who did read the comics, it was extra intense on screen.
Poor Red Rush. A lot of people brought up the whole perception being slower thing. That could have felt like a long time for him. And obviously seeing the rest of the Guardians of the Globe trying to help him out and not being able to get in there in time. It's just brutal. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you did enjoy that video. It was a fun one to do, going back and watching all of the episodes to see all of the different deaths. Let us know if you think we put them in the right order, if there's anything that you thought was more brutal than we thought. Also, if there's any characters that we just left out or any deaths that you thought deserved to be on this list. Love to hear from you guys. So thanks again. Thanks again to everyone who has subscribed. We are having so much fun doing this channel, and just your guys' support means the world. So thank you everyone, and have a good one.